Omakase, the life and words of author M. Kieran. If this is our first time meeting each other, let me give you a brief introduction. My name is Max. I write books for a living. The month of Halloween it's beginning when I'm recording this episode, but it will be in full force by the time you listen to it. In celebration of that, I will share with you my favorite Halloween candy, which, after a long time of meditation and consideration, I have realized it is, without a doubt, the standard for Halloween candy when it comes to moi, is Kit Kat bars. I know. I love Snickers. Snickers may be the best candy bar ever. It's the peanuts. The peanuts really add a lot to it. But Kit Kats are just so reliable. Kit Kats, I think, may be the vanilla ice cream of candy bars. By the way, my pronouns are they, them. And if you're wondering, Max, what do you think about the staple candy of Halloween? Candy corn. And to that, I will reply to you with only honesty. I'm not American. I didn't have candy corn growing up, so I absolutely detest it, and I do not understand the point behind it. But, I spent half of my life in Mexico, so I never really had an attachment to candy corn. But then again, all of my friends who are born and raised in the US are all like, I don't get candy corn, so it may be like a East Coast thing, I don't know. And, hi there. Welcome to a spooky episode of Omakase, a writing advice and inspiration podcast by yours truly, me, M. Kieran. If you're unfamiliar with the format, it goes a little bit like this. I spend the first segment telling you about my week, what I've been doing, what I've been writing or revising as of the case with this week, a little bit about the media that I have consumed, whether it is books, video games, movies, and so forth. The second segment is 2 viewer questions. Today, we'll be talking about how to write a story when you have the end in mind and nothing else, and do I have a writing routine? And then, on the third segment, we'll be going over a spooky writing prompt. Also, 3 items of housekeeping this week. The first one is that the song you hear at the beginning and at the end of the show is Dream of Green by the OC Jazz Collective. You can find a link to it in the description down below, as well as a link to treating me a cup of coffee, a one-time donation. If you want to support me and Patron's not your thing, you can just treat me to a cup over there, and I will give you shout-outs like everyone else. Oh, and I nearly forgot. I want to say a big sorry to everyone. This episode was a little bit delayed for the patrons. 1, because I got sick, and 2, because I wanted to just get down to business and finish the revision pass of my current novel, which is what I did this week. There's also, there's also an unnatural number of cars and airplanes around my area right now, for which I apologize. I actually changed my recording day from Wednesdays, which also happens to be trash day. Yes, I know, foresight is 2020. I didn't think that, trash day would be a problem, so I shifted. I literally have it on my bullet journal. No recording days on Wednesday anymore. And I'm thinking to myself, there will be no trash trucks and no background noise, and now there's like 3 airplanes flying overhead. So, that's life. Talking about life, what about my life? What have I been doing this past week? Today I'm going to talk about 2 things. One will be a really, really quick rant. I might even time myself. But before we get there, I spent all of last week, between the previous episode and this one, editing. Putting my nose to the grindstone, burning the midnight oil, and many other metaphors for explaining over time. I have been pushing through this revision pass, and yesterday I finally finished it. That was a rough revision pass. And I should have known. The writing was on the wall. or rather, on my computer. The first chapter of that novel required so much work that I spent a whole day just working on that chapter. And I'm not trying to tell you hard rules here, but in my experience, that never happens. I never just spend one day on a chapter. That is almost like unreal for me, because the way that my revision process works is that I don't make the chapter perfect in one go. I do passes. And I realized that there was so much work to be done with this first chapter that I just took off my metaphorical gloves and I just spent the whole day splicing that chapter. And I don't know if I think I told my friends and I told my lovely spouse, but I haven't told you guys how that went. I've also been sick. Like, I've been really sick. I put a poll on Twitter, and the options were like, if I don't get better by Monday, what should I do? And the first option was record it while being sick. The second option was record a short episode while being sick. The third option was hold on / postpone it. And the fourth option was skip an episode, and I had in parentheses, don't pick this option. Like a whole third of people, a third of the people who happened to be troublemakers decided to pick the don't pick this option. Everybody was like, Max, hold on. Thankfully, by Monday, which happens to be today, my voice sounds like this. I don't sound as bad as I did a few days ago. I don't sound like Squidward anymore. But I'm doing better. I forgot how I got to this particular side conversation, but it's fine. Listen, I'm doing better. But that editing was a lot of work. What happened with chapter 1 was that when I was looking at chapter 1, from the 10,000 mile point of view, or 10,000 feet up in the air view, I'm looking at it and I'm like, this chapter is about 3 things happening. 3 things that I want you to know about the main character. And they need to happen in this order, because if I don't tell them in this order, chronologically it makes no sense. But the order was also part of the problem, because the way in which the story was told, it wasn't until about halfway through this long chapter that you would finally get to know where you were at, and you would get to see what the protagonist looked like. And you know me, I always want to make sure that I tell you who you're seeing and what you're seeing. AS the heck P is what I do. I want you to be able to picture things as soon as possible. And I was messing around with the first chapter because I didn't want to just splice it. I didn't want to just rearrange the pieces. So what I did instead is that I looked at the 3 segments of the story and I worked super hard at transitions. I realized that it really felt as though there were 3 parts of a chapter put together, and I eased the transitions in between the scenes. It required a lot of adding new writing, a lot of rephrasing existing writing, and a little bit of taking away things that didn't make sense in the context of the new way that the chapter looked. That I took care of that. That got done. But that was kind of the foreshadowing for the rest of the revision process all the way until the end. I spent a lot of time in the middle chapters. The first 5 chapters are so long, they are literally half of the novel, because I'm explaining a lot of things. I'm introducing you to a lot of elements. And once the action comes in, it doesn't stop. It's a very kind of, it's an action-packed movie. But there's a lot of things that happen in this story. And I realized that in a story that is about 14 chapters long, the first 5 are half of the novel, because there's a lot of stuff going on. So I spent a lot of time in that first half of the novel making sure that everything made sense, that everything was clear, all those threads were closed, that my writing was consistent throughout the whole thing. So that meant that if I used a particular device later in the story, it has to show up earlier, all those sort of things. I went through my big, scary list of revision notes. The really scary questions like, does the twist make sense? Did I over foreshadow the reveal? Is the romantic relationship between the 2 protagonists clear? Is the antagonist relatable? Did I make her point appear legitimate, as though she isn't just a paper cutout of an antagonist, but rather a real person with real beliefs. And I think I did pretty well. Like, I finished the whole pass, and I was looking over my notes, checking them off one by one, double checking. A character had to have her name changed, so I did a big, huge search to make sure that I never, ever called her by her old name. Double checking last names, double checking this and that, and a certain thing had to be taken out, because at the beginning of the story, I did a thing where the characters referred to elements in the setting by another name. I know I'm being very vague. They referred to certain things in the setting by a different name, and that never comes back. And technically speaking, it doesn't come back because it never comes back up in conversation, and the conversations they're having in the second half of the story don't really dwell a lot on the regular everyday life of that world, where those particular words are more relevant. So I realized, well, I only say it a couple times on chapter 2, and it never comes up ever again. I might as well just cut it out. The story looks a lot more concise if I don't have these inconsistencies. And so, I powered through the rest of the story, all up until I found myself at chapter 11, 12, 13, and 14, the last 4 chapters of the story. And then the editing process changed dramatically. And I guess I should just say the word that comes to mind. It was easy. It was actually like a breeze to read through those final 4 chapters, because I'm reading through them and I'm like, yeah, there's that device that I established earlier. The writing here is spot on. This is clean. This is actually a really good piece of dialogue. And I did this all the time. I would start editing a paragraph and I would start trying to rephrase things, but then I would look down a couple more lines on the page and find out that I had already rephrased the line. I just had to ease the transition. So it was a lot of just like quick small fixes, a couple of clarifications in dialogue, clearing through my revision notes, and next thing I know, I had cleared through the novel. I cleared through the epilogue. And the story was over. I had finished this huge revision pass, which I thought was going to be easier than the last one, but it turned out to be way longer and way harder. And this story is now dramatically different from the one I wrote by hand. And it's still really different from the one I wrote, transcribed, and then I edited. I have done 2 full passes on this story, and it's looking really good. But I also realized that I'm coming really close to this story. I'm not going to touch it until probably the end of this week, where I'm going to do one more pass. It's what I call the text-to-speech pass, where I let my computer kind of just read passages of the story to me to make sure that I don't have any words that my brain would autocorrect, or any passages that are missing words, or things that just don't sound good. And once that's done, because by now I've cleared through all of my revision notes, I have mercilessly cut through this story, looking for inconsistencies and things that don't quite make sense, and patched all of them up. It's coming to the point now where the story is almost ready to be sent out to beta readers. So I'm going to be working on that probably on Sunday. But between that and then, I have a lot of stuff to catch up to. I owe some of the patrons a zine, and I'll get that done. But it's interesting to be once again near the end of the process. I am so close to the story that like I know entire passages by memory. I can very vividly see the story and the characters, and this is the point in which I need some space. I need to get out of it. I think there's a car. I think about a week, 6 days. That's a really close car. Jesus, it's like right outside my window. It's like that 80s thing where like the bad boy standing, in his car holding up a boombox, and I'm like, first off, I don't know you. Secondly, I'm not in high school. And 3, go home! It's 11 a.m. on a Monday. Go to school! Teenagers nowadays. Talking about teenagers. I've done enough about editing. Let's move over real quick to a topic that I want to cover really quickly, okay? My lovely spouse and I have a little channel where we play games and stuff. It's a completely polar opposite tone of this podcast. That's why, it's most likely it isn't your thing, and that's fine. But we play games and we have fun, and we played a new game. We're being current for once. And I know it's a video game conversation. Don't worry, it will be about story and character. Trust me. We played the first episode of an episodical game titled Life is Strange 2. If you follow me on Twitter, I posted a huge thread talking about my disappointment with that story. And I'm not going to go in great detail about how inconsistent it is and how badly written it is. Instead, I'm going to focus on one thing, and that is character. One of the issues that I didn't talk on that Twitter thread, and one of the issues that I want to talk about because I think it's a really important thing to bring up, and that is a conversation about the story's main character. The main character of that story is a teenage boy. And the story doesn't really attempt to show you a lot of his point of view. You get basically no internal dialogue from him. You play as him, you control him, you make choices, and you affect the outcome of the story. Let me say that again. You, quotation fingers, affect the outcome of the story. But you basically get no characterization from him. And this is unfortunate because he's the protagonist. And even if this is a story in which the player makes choices, there should still be color to the character. There should be at least some sort of connection to him, because he's not a faceless, silent protagonist, like in, old school games, where you're basically just using him as an avatar. And you don't get that here. This character is a person who's immediately connected to the central part of the story, and the biggest thing that I disliked about him and his presentation is that instead of showing us character moments for him, we're given a laundry list of all the things that he is. Through exposition, through the elements in the background, the main character of Sean Diaz is, and here's the following list. Sean is a skater. He is a stoner. He goes to parties all the time. He's also a track field star. He loves to draw and is really good at it. And also he works, by the way, he's 16 years old. This is not a real person. I don't know what you were doing when you were 16, but I had like two things going on. So when the story uses all these elements of him as shorthand for what kind of person he is. Doesn't really tell you what he believes in, what kind of person he is, how he feels about the world. Instead, you're just bombarded with, oh look, he has a skateboard. Oh man, I love going to skateboard park with my friends. Oh man, I love going to parties. I'm gonna go to a party later tonight. And it's all feels like shorthand. And aside from that laundry list being ridiculous, it also feels insincere. And this is the thing that I don't want to say I have like a sensor for. Like I can just feel it when it's insincere. And the character of Sean feels like a character made by a committee of people. Committee? Is it committee? Let's say a council of people. I can never get that word right. A council of people. Because in the credits for this game, there's a total of like 10 people responsible for the story. And the character of Sean, it feels as though a group of people sitting around a table were just brainstorming cool things. I imagine like a big table at an office, clear windows, everybody's wearing suits, and they're all like, Johnson, what do kids find cool nowadays? And someone raises a hand, and they're like, skateboards? It's like, that's a good idea. What about you, Johnson? And then Johnson's like, drugs? And it's like, and then drugs? Question mark. Oh, and then the boss is like, Johnson, you've just earned yourself a promotion. I want you to go down there. I want you to go down to a local vape store and find out everything there is to know about them pipes. Get to it, Johnson. That's dumb. That's dumb. It feels insincere. I have trouble believing that this 16-year-old boy would have enough time on his hands to skate, draw all the time. What's the other one? Be a track field star, go to parties all the time, have a part-time job. And there's a couple more elements that the story tells you, but I'm not going to drop them in here because it's just a little bit too much. But imagine all this laundry list of facts, and I still don't know anything about who he is as a person. Oof, oof, oof. That's why part of it feels artificial and also feels insincere. I'm like, this doesn't feel like a real person. This feels like a character created to appear cool. So consider this as a great reminder. Not to make your character an amalgamation of traits on their character sheet, but rather really show who they are. Because I couldn't care less if Sean liked to go skateboarding. I would be more interested, to know what it means for him to hang out with his friends at the skate park, or how has his life changed from, working, a part-time job while balancing all these other things. It all feels like shorthand. It feels like a quick way to show you who he is without actually doing any of the work. And that right there is just not good writing. But for now, oh man, okay, that wasn't that long of a rant, was it? It was. Okay, you win. And your reward! What's behind door number 1? It's time for the shoutouts! This show is brought to you by you, the lovely viewers who support me through patreon.com/mkaren, the #1 place to support me and what I do. By pledging just $1 every single month, you get yourself this podcast several days, unless I get really invested editing a book, several days before they go live on YouTube and everywhere else, as well as a bunch of other perks. Like, for instance, getting your name shouted out right here in this segment of the show. I want to give a big shout out to Atlac. Atlac has a DeviantArt page. You can find out more about their writing and their art over at deviantart.com/AHTILAK. I also want to give a shout out to Isabella Doucette. Isabella writes LGBT plus positive novels, and you can find them on Smashwords. You can do a search for Isabella Doucette, or find them under the username ILMTDOUCETTE over at smashwords.com. And also, a shout out to these patrons. I appear to have flipped the list upside down, so today I'll be reading in reverse alphabetical order, I guess. Synexia, Soulmuse, Polycraftwall, Pat Eitson, Nicola, Mark Maruska, Lacey, Joe, Irina Phoenix, Gilbert Gaudreau, Lishadra, Caitlin, Brenda, Angela, Amelia, Alyssa Dudley, and, don't mind me scrolling in the background, A. Howard. Okay, that was kind of fun. It was kind of fun just reading the names backwards, but anyhow, let's move over to the second segment of the show, the viewer questions. Today, I have 2 questions. The first one is about how do you write a story, or brainstorm a story, or outline a story, when all you have is the idea of the ending and nothing else. Now, this isn't something that I have actively done in the past from the beginning. Usually what happens when I'm writing a novel is that somewhere around the middle of the writing process, writing through the novel, in my walks or when I'm just thinking about the story, I suddenly get an idea for where the story could go. And if I really like it, I start kind of working backwards to make sure the story kind of goes in that direction, but never really forcing it because, stories change. There's actually a presentation I saw by a Japanese game writer, which some of you may recognize their name of, Yoko Taro. Did a presentation on how he writes stories to the video games. And he explained the thing with a really good name that I like, but it's a thing that we all know from writing novels. He called it writing through photo negatives. If you want the big climax of the story to be about this really incredibly sad thing that happens, then you must have the player, in this case the reader, get attached to the people involved really early on, which means working in reverse. If you want this to feel meaningful and important, then you have to establish it. And the reader / player has to get attached to these characters. Just acknowledging the connection between, cause and effect goes a long way. Part of what makes really bad writing ineffective is kind of the just instant gratification. No, here's a horrible thing that happens with no setup, with you having no attachment to characters or anything. That kind of writing is ineffective, and it's bad, and you're not gonna do that, because what are we here for? To write good stories. So, if you have this ending in mind, this ending that you want to see happen, then what you must do, of course, is look at the elements present in the ending and work backwards. If this thing is going to happen, I have to make sure that all of the pieces are laid out in the scenes that lead up to that moment, as well as the emotional attachment to the characters and the people present. Not to spoil a story thread for a game that is like 10 years old at this point, but during that presentation, if you want to look it up, also, there's background, they're dogs and cats living together, absolute chaos, other pop culture references. There's noise in the background, and I don't know what's going on. But if you want to look up the talk, it is a GDC talk featuring Yoko Taro. But the big crux of his presentation is that if he wanted the player to feel really sad halfway through the story, where this one character dies at her wedding, then you clearly must meet her before she's getting married, you must meet her before any of that is present, and you must make the events lead to that feel great. And by establishing that, when the big punch in the gut comes, you actually do feel it, and it feels even more real. So aside from, think about the elements that need to happen, imagine those scenes, if you want that character to die at her wedding, then you must, meet her before she's even thinking of marriage, meeting her years prior, meeting her when she's young, meeting her daydreaming about what life could be one day, when she finds the one, etc., etc., etc. Aside from that advice, I have a couple more things that I want to just kind of drop for you, okay? I want you to picture this, okay? Because you're thinking of the ending as, if you imagine a timeline, like the timeline on a video, and you were to scrub forward and backwards by holding on the little indicator on the line. If we were to imagine the timeline of a story as a timeline on a video, or the duration bar on a video, we imagine the ending to be on the very far right edge. The ending of the video. But I want you to think about this differently. And this is a lesson that I picked up from learning about writing short stories, is that the ending, this critical moment that you imagine, is not the very end of the story. Imagine the little indicator on the timeline moving more towards the center. Imagine this as being the pivotal climax of your story, the thing that happens at the middle or the 75% mark. Why imagine it this way? Well, because the one thing that I feel that a lot of people forget about or overlook is that the dramatic thing happening isn't so much as effective as the payoff and the consequences that befall that moment. Having the story end with the girl dying on her wedding day isn't as emotionally striking as seeing the downfall from that event, seeing how the friends and people related to her reacted to that, and how, our protagonists reacted to that. Seeing the aftermath of those events, those calamities, those world-ending and shattering moments, I find to be also effective, if not more. I think we have all had experiences with this, like books and games and stories, where the story ends and then cut to black, there's credits, and you get absolutely nothing else after that. And sometimes that feels honestly insincere. It feels as though the writers didn't think of anything else, or it feels as though they didn't want to, explain anything that happened. The story just cut to black and you're left with only questions. Some people might argue that that's effective. I think it depends on the story. I very much prefer payoff and actually getting to see the aftermath than just, being left with questions as to what happened to everyone in the story. And the other thing is that having that change of perspective, of your own perspective, and imagining this event that you think is the end of the story as more of the very middle of the story helps a lot, because there's less scenes and less stuff that you have to imagine beforehand. Because when you're imagining the ending, there's a whole series of scenes and chapters that you have to kind of figure out how they all lead to that moment. And I also do feel that it enables a little bit more flexibility, because that ending becomes the middle of the story, and since stories change and stories develop, you now have the rest half of the story to enjoy how the aftermath plays out based on how the story changed during writing it. That right there is just an idea, a change of perspective. If you have what you think is the ending of a good story, and you want to write it, but you don't know what's before that, I say move it more towards the middle. If anything, it will help you figure out what goes before it a lot quicker. And now for the second question of the day. Do I have a writing routine? One of the things that I talk about a lot is I want to inspire you to find your own process, to find what works for you and what makes you the most creative. I got a question recently asking me, how can a writer develop their own routine? How did I find out what worked for me the most? Because at the end of it all, I'm not here selling you what I think is the best advice ever and what will make you big, successful, top 10 ways to guarantee your book to be a bestseller. I'm telling you here my opinion, what worked for me, and my experience. And my experience over time has been one of continuously disarming, deconstructing, and removing routine from writing. There is an article I read a long time ago, and I forget it. But it's the thing, things linger in me, but I forget everything else related to it. I read this article by an ex-Navy SEAL who was talking about his training and the one element that he felt had enabled him to achieve all these things and not only survive training, but actually survive, being out there, doing the things Navy SEALs do. And he talked about how we as people often give ourselves backdoors. We give ourselves ways in which we can escape responsibility or escape things that scare us, things that we're afraid of. We give ourselves backdoors, quick exits, to justify not trying. And after a long time of thinking, because that particular idea lingered on me, and I realized over time, looking at my processes, the way that I prepared myself to write, I used to want my environment to be one way. I used to do this and that, have these things going on. I used to have a writing background on my program for every story that I had. I had all these parts of the process that they weren't backdoors, but they behaved like backdoors. If I didn't have this, or if I didn't have that, or if my environment wasn't this way, or if I didn't have this one thing, deep down I felt like I would have an excuse to not write. Well, of course I can't write today. I don't have this. I haven't had this other thing. I haven't had my cup of coffee. I can't write yet. And I found over time that not only was that not true, I don't need a cup of coffee to write, but it was also a backdoor. It gave me a quick excuse to justify not doing the scary thing, which is writing. The scary thing is writing. And it's the thing that every writer, whether they've published dozens of novels or they're just getting started, everybody's terrified of writing. The struggle against the blank page is a real one, and one that everybody deals with. So I look through my entire process, because, I'm a giant nerd. I made SOPs for my entire list of tasks for brainstorming a novel, editing it, and so forth. An SOP, by the way, is a standard operating procedure. It's what I used to do when I worked at a laboratory. So all that programming is still there. But I was looking through it, here are my steps for making a novel. What steps in this list are backdoors? They are ways in which I can justify not writing or justify putting it off for another day instead of, committing, sitting down, and getting the work done. And I cleaned up through that list. I took care of a bunch of things. I took a bunch of stuff out. And when it came to my routine, I mostly just kind of... I like to claim that I don't have a routine. Oh, look, the police are out there. They're coming for me. They heard about all my terrible anime jokes. I claim that I don't have a routine, and I don't think I do. I don't have a routine as in, like, I light a candle, I turn the lights down, I close the curtains. It's less a routine and more as, 2 steps, sometimes not even the first step. One of the things that I like to do to get myself in the mindset to write is to just put on one of the songs of my playlist for that story, and I just close my eyes, and for the length of like 2 minutes, I just imagine the characters. I imagine where the story's at, and once those 2 minutes are up, and you can bet that I have a timer on that, then I put my hands on the keyboard, and I start writing. And I just start writing. Sometimes I don't even do what I refer to as like 2 minutes of hyping up. Sometimes I don't even do that. I just jump in. It's not easy. I don't want to paint it as it being an easy part of the process, but I just jump in. I've been here so long, I've been here so many times that I know that the hardest and scariest moment is right before you start. And it's the sort of thing where sometimes I just force myself to write a really, really bad first line. Let me just say, the first chapter of the novel that I'm editing had a really bad first line. And I kind of felt good about it until I was, doing this latest pass where I was being really critical. And I'm like, okay, you know what? This first line is not good. That first line was like 2 steps away from being, it was a dark and stormy night. So, that got edited out. But it didn't matter that it got edited out because I wouldn't have gotten to editing the novel if I hadn't finished writing it. And I wouldn't have finished writing the story if I hadn't put that really, really bad first line. Sometimes you just have to start. And I know that that's not the most helpful piece of advice, especially when, you're trying to muster the courage to face the blank page. But honestly, it's just a matter of jumping in. I have always been of the mindset that, that shock when you jump into the pool, or when you want to swim, but the water is cold. It's always cold. And you can, go down the steps very slowly, or you can just jump in. Another metaphor is you can tear off that band-aid very slowly and feel every second of the pain, or you can just jank it off and just get it over with. I very much prefer the latter. Just get it over with. Alternatively, by the way, because we had this problem, my wife and I, she had a really, really sticky band-aid that she had put on, and she didn't want me to just tear it off. She wanted to just face the torture. So instead, I told her that heat dries up the adhesive on stickers and band-aids. So if you apply a lot of heat from a heating blanket or a hairdryer, or just, the air coming out of a heater, if you have that be directly on top of the band-aid for a few minutes, it will dry up the adhesive, and it will just fall off. So there's a little bit of life advice for you right there. But honestly, just jump into the pool. Just start. It's not gonna get any easier. You're not gonna wake up one day and sit down and realize, oh, I've got all the words with me, and boom, I just got the novel done in one day. It's a little facetious, I know, but writing is hard work. Writing requires dedication, and it requires to be a little brave. So I want to inspire you today to check if you have given yourself any backdoors. Check what parts of the process you really need to have a writing routine. Because when you look at the whole process, what do you actually need? To me, Sometimes I need a little bit of inspiration. Music helps. But most of the time, just have to sit down and just start with a really, really, really bad first line. Okay? Okay. And by the way, I just want to remind you that it doesn't matter how bad that first line is, because you will be editing that book later. Trust me, the first line of this novel originally was something very close to "It was a dark and stormy night." But it's not that anymore. It's actually got a really good first line now that makes sense and that it resonates with the rest of the story. But I would have never gotten there had I been stuck trying to figure out what was the best first sentence right off the start. Okay? Okay. And now, for the final segment of the show, the prompt. Every week, unless there's different plans happening, I give you a weird writing prompt, an idea, a scenario, some way for you to think about your stories and be creative, even if you are stuck in traffic, or you are waiting for your parents to pick you up, or if you're at the library during lunch, or if you are cutting your break at work. I think it's best to remain a little bit creative every single day, even if it's just thinking about stories, just flexing your creative muscles by thinking about what you would do. And today, we're going to be doing something a little spooky. It's not super specific, but what I want to do today is to have a case of the AU. AU might be the name, the chemical name for gold, but it also stands for alternate universe. Since it's the month of Halloween, I want to inspire in you to think of an alternate world, an alternate setting and a story for one of your characters. I want you to think about one of the OCs of the original characters you have made. Whether it is the protagonist, the antagonist, one of the background characters, someone in there, you've got yourself a long list of OCs, pick one. I want you to take them, and this is especially good if they are not people who belong in a world of darkness and fear. Take this character, and imagine what would their story be like if it was not the story that they're in, but rather a world of terror. We could be talking about a story that involves a masked killer in a summer camp, a monster that visits you in your dreams, or a creature from outer space. I want you to imagine this character, the protagonist of one of your stories, and imagine how would they fit in a horror story. Vampires and ghosts, mummies and werewolves. How would this story be like if they were at the center of the story? If they got their own story in an alternate universe, but it's not the story they're used to. A story of horror and dread. Have you ever written horror? Are you a fan of scary movies and scary books? Even if you have no experience, fear, much like love, is something that we can all relate to, because we have all felt it. We have all caught ourselves mesmerized by shadows in the night. We have all been terrified of what lurked in the darkness of our home, coming late one night. As we searched blindly for the light switched, the shapes in the living room seemed alien, seemed strange. We have all had dreadful dreams where reality was not as it seemed. There is one dream that I remember vividly. I think it was actually a night terror because I was aware. The kind of dreams where you know you're in a dream, or you know you're aware, but you cannot move, because the sleep paralysis prevents you from just moving your limbs and waking yourself up. In this dream, I imagined myself in the living room of my old house back in Mexico. A 2-story house. And the house was long. Not wide, but long. So the living room stretched from the front door all the way to the back. Almost in the style of what you would call a shotgun house. In this long hallway, I would find myself running to the door, the front door of the house, running as fast as I could, but the hallway stretching longer than it seemed possible. And behind me, I could hear the steps and scratching sounds. Not of monsters, of demons, of goblins, of duendes, or phantasms, but toys that had come alive and were coming after me with pointy fingers and bloodied faces, chasing me down the length of that corridor until I came to the door and twisted the knob and nothing came, and I would find myself turning around and looking at them. Some toys bigger than I remembered, some of them brushing up against the ceiling. Fear is something we all relate to, something we all know. I think it's difficult, almost impossible, to have lived your whole life without ever being afraid of something. And I'm not talking about afraid of how you would do in a test or afraid of talking before class. I'm talking about the primal fear. The way in which shadows at night seemed more real. The way in which the creaking of a house in the dead of night seems to be louder, more dreadful than during the day. What was that sound in the kitchen? You heard it, but you try not to think about it, not to acknowledge it. You try to go back to sleep, but you can't sleep because of the scratching on the ceiling. You tell yourself the house is just settling. You tell yourself it's all just in your mind. We can all relate to that. Take that character. And I'm not saying that you should put them through hell again, but put them in a story where horror is the main course. What would a horror story be like for them? The really fun thing about having this be an alternate universe is that you can have elements come in from the world they're from. People they know could be present. The antagonist may be the monster after them. Or maybe they themselves are the monster. What would a horror story be like from the point of view of the thing hiding under the bed? What is it like to wait until light's gone, and the lights are out, and the kids are in bed? What is it like to crawl from underneath the bed and what lies there? And to get up, stand at the foot of the bed, and stare at that child, terrified of what they see. They are afraid of you, but are you afraid of them? Spooky writing prompts. Hey guys, welcome to episode 16 of Omakase, a writing advice and inspiration podcast by yours truly. I hope that you had fun with today's exercise. It was weird. It was something that I've been thinking about. I kind of wanted to see if I could maybe organize a month-long challenge, but NaNoWriMo's coming up and everybody's gonna be too busy doing that. But I really like the idea of writing a story or a book, a kind of story that you are unfamiliar with. And I've only really written horror like a couple of times, so I was thinking about it, and being in the spirit of Halloween and scary stuffs. And I thought, well, what if I did an AU, a horror AU of one of my characters. And I thought that was such a fun idea, why not share it with you guys? For now though, I hope you enjoyed the podcast, I hope you had fun. Again, sorry to the patrons for the slight delay on getting this episode out. I've been a little sick, but I mean, I got through this whole podcast without sneezing or coughing or anything, so I think I'm doing relatively good. The background noise is something that bothers me, but it's fine. Hi there. We're now gonna jump over to the shout-out section of the show, where I give a shout-out to every single lovely person who supports this podcast and helps me make more of what you love. You can go to patreon.com/mkaren. If you pledge $1, I will shout you out every week in this segment of the show. But anyhow, before I do that, thank you for tagging along, and I hope that between now and the next time we meet, that you get some writing or some editing done. Okay? And now, it's begun! Welcome to the end of the video, also known as the end of the video club, where I do no cuts, no editing, none of that nonsense. You get to see the full, uncut, unedited, director's cut edition of the shoutouts to all the lovely people out there helping me make this possible. Since up is down, down is up, today's opposite day, I'm going to be reading the shoutouts in reverse alphabetical order. And to double it up, I'm going to do the shoutouts for people who treated me to cups of coffee first. I usually do those last, but I mean, today's opposite day, so that's fine. First off, a lovely person treated me to a cup of coffee, and that is Mark Maruska! Double dipping! Double dipping, not only being a lovely patron, but also treating me to a cup of coffee. Thank you, Mark! And now, the shoutouts from Patreon proper. First off, this is gonna be weird because I'm reading them backwards, so my whole brain is like, I've got them twisted, turned upside down. Now sit down a minute, just wait right there, tell you all about these lovely people who have pledged $1 or more to my Patreon page. That wasn't funny. I tripped over my words, and this is the sort of treatment you get at the end of the video club, where we stay until the end of the video and I do no edits. Wendy Christopher, Thomas Baker, Synexia, Sylvia Leitilla, Soul Muse, Sky D. White, Shimmer Tales, Roa. This feels wrong. It feels wrong to read them backwards, but it's fine. Raquel Fernandez, Polycraftual, Pat Eichson, Pablo, Novels and Tomes, Noam Sahar, Nicolay, Nicole Grissom, Nicola, Mary Foster Smith, Mark Maruska, MT Locatelli, Lier Killo, Lacey, Kid Lee, Kiel, Kaylee, Kameshwar Rao Shaluri, KM Anderson, Juan Nunes, Joe, Jeffrey James Williams, Jaytana Kirkwood, Janosch Heibatsky, Isabella Doucette, Irina Phoenix, Heather Tasker, Gilbert Gaudreau, Aerosos, Eleanor, Dwayne Jackson, Clem Pastor, Citro, Kristen Lofton, Kristen Dennis, Lee Shadra, Kathy Lindsay, oh no, I did it again, Kathy Lindsay, Carriette Eccleston, Cannibal Lily, Caitlin, and the other Caitlin, C.E. Richards, Brenda, Vlarg, Biting the Sun, Aniexo Hoshi, Angela, Amy Palmer, Amelia, Amanda Stevens, Elisa Dudley. It's like I'm walking into the dance hall, the haunted dance hall, and I'm like, is that Alistair Baywood? And Adlek? And oh my god, it's A. Howard! A. Howard! And then A. Howard takes off their mask and they're like, I would have gotten away with this if it wasn't for those meddling kids. And that M. Kieran. Okay. You know what? I almost wish I had started this whole joke way earlier. I wish I had established the joke earlier so I could have actually done like a spooky shout out. But there's still plenty of October left, so I'm not particularly worried about that. Hey! So hey there! Welcome! Thank you for tagging along until the very end of the episode. And now for the super duper secret additional inspiration that you all get for staying up until this moment. I've been stuck editing for a long while, and I'm not sure what I'm gonna do next. I find it unlikely that I will immediately jump back into writing, mostly because I want to get the next wave of books going. But I can feel now that I've stepped away from writing for long enough that the next time I do is gonna be scary and hard. And it's likely that if you're listening to this and you're thinking of starting to write, like if you haven't done so in forever, and you're looking for inspiration, here is some. It's going to be scary no matter what. It's gonna feel like jumping into the pool no matter what. And I think that's not a bad thing. I find solace, and I find inspiration in knowing that the struggle isn't unreal. It isn't impossible. It is something that every writer deals with and overcomes every time they sit down. A novel will not be written in a day or a week. You can't just cram through a novel. A novel is about a long series of victories, not just one battle but a war. Sometimes the blank page wins, but at the end, if you keep working at it, you stay with your conviction, and you keep showing up to the blank page, you will emerge victorious.